Good morning, everyone, and welcome to First Draft, where I speak with journalists and authors about their important work and the stories behind them. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square. Next week, Tod Blanche heads to the Senate for 2 days of hearings for his nomination as Attorney General. And like many of Trump's picks, this one is controversial, as Blanche was formerly Trump's personal lawyer, and he has not been following the Epstein Transparency Act. Now, 1,200 plus former Department of Justice employees have urged members of the Senate committee to reject this nomination. Camaron Stevenson is a national correspondent for COURIER Newsroom, and he joins us now to talk about the likelihood of an Attorney General Tod Blanche. Camaron, thank you so much for joining us again.
Of course. Yeah, no, Susan, thanks for having me. I'm glad people are interested in this. There have been so many former Trump attorneys who have snuck into important roles within our government, lifetime appointments, that I think it's really important that Tod Blanche gets the scrutiny he deserves. It's important for people to understand his background, what he's actually being brought in to do, and why his approach could be more effective than what Pam Bondi was trying to do, who was also a former Trump attorney.
Yes. Well, Camaron, why don't we start with who Tod Blanche is, his background, and why you and so many experts are pointing to the fact that he could be such a dangerous person in this position.
Yeah. So Tod Blanche, he's an interesting figure because he is a true recipient of what I describe as Trump derangement syndrome, which is someone who sees the opportunity to grift, and so they throw away all their values to lay themselves before Trump and his administration.
Mm.
Tod Blanche, he was, as far as I know, he was a New York Democrat back in the day. You know, he was a public prosecutor. He was respected. He had a very solid career going. Then in 2022, it was after Trump left office when he was finally getting in trouble for all the crimes that he committed, when he was finally getting indictments, when he was being brought to court. Tod Blanche left his position in private practice, started his own firm specifically to represent Donald Trump. And he was Trump's personal attorney throughout all of his criminal court cases. He was his attorney who made sure that Eileen Cannon's cases stalled until he was in office so that they went away. And he was the attorney that, when Trump was convicted on 34 felony counts, made sure that was stalled to the point where the judge, he sentenced him to nothing, essentially giving him a crime without consequence. So by all accounts, Tod Blanche has thrown himself in full force to Donald Trump's will. He wants to give Trump whatever he can, and he wants to find every legal avenue to do it. And he has the background to do that because, again, he was respected. He had a long storied career. He wasn't just a partisan hitman for hire going for any, legal gig he could.
There was that period after January 6th when Trump was no longer in office and he was being indicted for a series of felonies, when there were a lot of people who considered Donald Trump to be toxic. The conventional wisdom was his career was over. What do we know about Tod Blanche that made him decide, you know what, this is the guy that I want to throw in with? I'm going to be on Donald Trump's side now.
I think there is the public persona that he has put out, and then I think there's the reality of who he is as a person. And the public persona that the New York Times profiled when they reviewed him back in the day is that he is someone who saw Donald Trump, who was getting an unfair shake at things, and thought that he needed proper representation, thought that he needed, someone who could bring him justice. And so that's why he put his career on the line, started a new firm, and just dove full into defending Trump. I think the reality is that he is someone who sees himself at the same class level as Trump. I think he feels any attack on, a wealthy New York elite as an attack against him personally. And I believe that he sees success in providing Trump a pathway to profit and benefit from crimes as long as he's not actually held accountable as a personal win for him. And I think becoming Trump's attorney general is his ultimate goal. He sees that as a pinnacle of his career, something that where he can really use the DOJ to benefit Trump personally, because by extension, he thinks that will trickle down and be a benefit to him.
What a fascinating perspective, because there are so many people who have critiques of our justice system and how the system doesn't work for people who are poor and people of color. The idea that it doesn't work well enough for New York billionaires is not a popular perspective to have. And that's an interesting victim mentality that both he and Trump seem to share.
Oh, absolutely. And you see it throughout how they've weaponized the Department of Justice during his second term. They've turned the discrimination office into discrimination against white men. They hold people who should be held to the same standard as everyone else to a higher standard. And they are using the government to say, we are leaving these white men behind and we need to do everything we can to protect them from the evils of equality and equity. You see it in how they've gone after law firms, how they've attacked, higher education. And now we're seeing it in how they want to protect the Epstein class and people involved in Epstein's crimes from accountability. And Trump, of course, is at the center of that.
So Trump's first pick was Pam Bondi, former Attorney General of Florida, Trump loyalist. She was famously fired after a congressional hearing that didn't go particularly well, where she was extremely disrespectful to survivors. Of course, that was not the reason why Trump was upset with her. It was the fact that she was not able to defend him, in the way that he felt that she should have. We've gotten a lot of reporting that Trump was very upset that she did not shield him enough from the blowback over the Epstein files. In reality, we all know that maybe half the documents have been released that are legally supposed to under the bipartisan law that Donald Trump signed. But certainly Tod Blanche seems more combative and more willing to just continue his role as the president's personal lawyer, especially in this Epstein issue. Was that the fundamental issue that helped Tod Blanche rise and Pam Bondi fall? Or are there other dynamics that you've reported on that maybe aren't as well known?
I would say that is the biggest overarching reason. I mean, there were members of his administration that were meeting in the Situation Room behind his back to discuss.
With J.D. Vance.
Yeah, the Vice President of the United States and other members of the administration. These are the highest level officials you can imagine in the most secure room probably in the world. And so I think it would be absurd to say that this was anything other than the biggest threat to his dominance. But I think one of the reasons he was so hard on Pam Bondi and so quick to throw her to the side was that she committed one of the biggest sins in a convicted rapist and misogynist's mind, is that she was a woman. He set up a series of women in his administration that one by one he has gotten rid of. And I think that stems from his first term, where he was churning through people so quick that the mentality would be, well, I need to put some body bags here in the first round. And then once I get rid of them, I can bring in the heavy hitters. They lasted a lot longer than they did in the first term, still much shorter than most any other president has people in these positions. But I think that was the main problem, is that because she's a woman, nothing she could have done was good enough. She couldn't be fierce enough. She couldn't be combative enough. And he just couldn't sympathize with her. Whereas Tod Blanche, he's been with Trump long enough to earn his respect. He's seen how Trump likes to be considered and recognized in the courtroom. He's been able to defend him in a way that Trump has been very appreciative of.
Mhm.
Trump considers Blanche as the guy who kept him out of jail,
Mhm.
because by all accounts he did. And and I think that's really what it comes down to, is that when Bondi began to fall from grace because of her handling of that release of the Epstein files, Blanche stepped in. She threw him under the bus when she was, talking to Congress about it. But if you were paying attention, you could see him operating everything behind the scenes. He was the one at the press conferences. He was the one whose name was on the reports. Going through the Epstein files, he's the one in the internal memos that the FBI agents were talking about. They needed to let Blanche know about things, and they needed to Kash Patel about things. And so I think that just as Blanche was Trump's fixer in between terms, Trump is hoping that he's going to be his fixer for the Epstein files, and that he'll be able to effectively either sweep it under the rug or just by brute force of will push it out of public consciousness. I think that's wrong. I think he's miscalculating, but that seems to be what his hope is.
And that definitely seems to be his tactic. Whenever he goes on the Sunday shows, he's adamant. You've gotten all the documents that you're going to get. They're defying a court order right now. And obviously, there are a lot of documents that pertain to Donald Trump that we would all like to see. But there are a number of other associates of Donald Trump who seem to have gotten preferential treatment. And just we've seen how victims' names and their personal information have just been splashed all over the place, while alleged perpetrators have gotten the advantage of privacy. The entire process was mismanaged in a way that certainly seems purposeful and in a way to protect people who have done something wrong. And Tod Blanche seems not just to have done that behind the scenes. He seems to be, happy to brag about it in public and, to continue this, like he's making a promise as Attorney General. I will continue to obstruct justice and I will not do anything more with the Epstein files. That's my promise to you. And so I'm wondering, how is that going to go over, even with a Republican-controlled Senate? Is that something that they're going to swallow?
I think they will, until it starts to hurt them.
Hmm.
And I think we're seeing signs that, one, that covering up Epstein's crimes is hurting them. There are cracks. James Comer issued a surprise subpoena to Wall Street billionaire Leon Black a few weeks ago. Leon Black is someone who was involved with Epstein during the same time period that Trump was. And they both are famous for using these non-disclosure agreements to pay women hush money for the affairs that they had. James Comer, for months, he's been avoiding subpoenaing people. He even avoided holding interviews at all for a few months. And so the fact that this has pushed him tells me that he is beginning to be at his wit's end. And I think more broadly, Republicans are getting tired of being completely unable to move because of the Trump administration. The Trump has used the SAVE Act, his voter suppression bill, to totally immobilize Congress, to the fact where they can't even pass a defense bill while we're at war. It's beyond belief that they're allowing this to happen, and you're starting to see cracks. And I think Tod Blanche is going to start to get the brunt of that. I don't know how hard they're going to be on him during the judiciary confirmation hearing next week. I feel like he's still going to sail through that. But then in the aftermath, right after that is the midterm elections. Is he going to send troops to polling places, or is Congress going to bat him away from that? Should Democrats retake the House and or the Senate? Will he be able to withstand the actual scrutiny and actual investigations and threats that have teeth? Because right now, Democrats, they can threaten whatever they want. They can't do much. In November, depending on the election results, that could change in the following term.
I think we have some footage of Tod Blanche from back in February 2026 when he was still serving under Pam Bondi, and I think this is a good example of how Todd Blanche has handled the Epstein files and maybe a preview of what we'll get next week.
On Friday has already received a response from the victims, from Jeffrey Epstein's victims. I want to show the statement right now. It says survivors are having their names and identifying information exposed while the men who abuse us remain hidden and protected. This is outrageous. The Justice Department cannot claim it is finishing releasing files until every legally required document is released and every abuser and enabler is fully exposed. Will there be more releases?
I mean, look, first of all, we took great pains, as I explained on Friday, to make sure that we protected victims. We are talking about a review of 3.5 million pieces of paper that were released on Friday. Every time we hear from a victim or their lawyer that they believe that their name was not properly redacted, we immediately rectify that. And the numbers we're talking about, just so the American people understand, we're talking about 0.001% of all the materials. And we knew this. I said this on Friday, that of course the nature of this type of review was so the volume of materials that were reviewed, that there would be times when this happened. And so we're working hard to make sure that we fix that, and I expect that will continue.
Will more documents be released?
We have released, there are a small number of documents, as I said on Friday, that we're waiting for a judge to say we're allowed to release because of a protective order. But this review is over.
Camaron, do you think that will be his official line going into his line of questioning next week?
I think it will be. And I think if he's pushed in the slightest, we'll see how flimsy and shallow that argument is. That is all that he's been saying. Even when, journalist Katie Fang, who you may have talked with about this, she has sued because there are redactions that look very much to be, co-conspirators, clients, accomplices, people, sending him torture videos, for example, who he is still refusing to unredact their names despite the court ordering him to, essentially giving the same line and even going as far in the court filing to suggest that the person sending the torture video was a victim of Epstein's, which there's no logic into that allegation.
So the first step for Tod Blanche is to go through the Senate committee hearing process. And we've already heard from Tom Tillis, who is not running for re-election, really has nothing to lose, but he said that he is inclined to vote for Tod Blanche, which really, might put the stake in the heart of any effort to keep him out of this position. He's also won the endorsement of former Attorney General Bill Barr, who at the very end of his term did stand up to Donald Trump over January 6th. Is there enough institutional support pushing Republicans along that even with a very scary midterm election facing them, that they may just go along and give Trump the attorney general that he wants?
Absolutely. I don't think there is any reason for them to stand up against Trump for something that he wants so badly, and that is something for them that is so easy for them to do. This isn't like the SAVE Act, where they have to find 60 votes in the Senate, where, a couple Republicans can easily defect because it doesn't matter anyway. This, it will come down to almost every single vote. Trump really wants Blanche to be his attorney general, and for Republican senators, it's not worth the political capital. I don't know what their polling is like in their states, but I'm guessing that they're wagering that who the attorney general isn't going to be a big enough factor when people are going to vote. Now, they may be wrong. I think if people know the faintest or the slightest thing about Tod Blanche, especially his role in this apparent cover-up of the Epstein files, I think that will change people's minds. But I don't think it's worth it for Republican senators to feel the wrath of not only Donald Trump, but of his supporters, because anyone who goes against him, they are harassed online, they're attacked in person, their families are threatened. It's mafia tactics, and I don't know anyone that has the political will to publicly take the brunt of that at this point.
There's some irony there, of course, because it was the MAGA base for years that had the mantra to release the Epstein files. This was one of the reasons why they supported Donald Trump as president, because he was supposed to clean house and bring this massive conspiracy to light. Somehow they never really put two and two together, that there were endless photos of Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump partying together in Florida over the years. But now it seems like much of MAGA has been able to turn on a dime, and they will go along with whatever Donald Trump tells them to on these files. I'm wondering if through your reporting, is there somewhat of a break in MAGA on this? You know, you do have some public leaders like Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who of course have lost their congressional careers over it. They're not willing to go along with Trump. Is there a segment of the base that won't on this as well?
There is, and it is, I would say, the most brittle portion of his base. You know, there are ride or dies, people who have voted for him every single election. To them, even if they don't like what he's doing, even if they're unsure about the Epstein stuff, he's the lesser of two evils, and they want to support him no matter what. But the group, the voting bloc that won him the election in 2024, you know, a lot of young men who are in the manosphere, who don't really pay attention to politics, but they do get caught into Epstein files and conspiracy theories. This is a big breaking point for them. You know, and these are people who maybe last election was their first time ever voting. This would be arguably enough for them to sit out the midterm elections. And you know, when the White House had its UFC fight here a few weeks ago, there were a ton of manosphere, UFC, you know, Trump bros out here. Right. And unprompted, you know, myself, other journalists, interviews with them, talking, just seeing, well, what they were doing out here, totally unprompted, they would bring up Epstein and how they don't like how Trump was involved with him. And, you know, it's a small thing. It's something, it's, you know, it's a small group, but it was enough to win him the election 2024. And it could very easily be enough to cost Republicans the House and Senate in 2026.
That's really interesting. So you were actually out there for Donald Trump's big birthday party. What was that like in person? Because, you know, we were just, for those of us following at home, you know, the Weather Channel issued, you know, a warning, and people, we saw the White House was fighting with the Weather Channel and saying that it was a liberal conspiracy. I know there was a delay. Joe Rogan showed up. It seemed like a circus from afar, but I can't even imagine. What was it like to be there in person?
I would say circus from afar, carnival up close. It was, you know, it was as absurd as you can imagine. You know, there was red, white, and blue on all sorts of clothing. There were people just, you know, people just there, one for the spectacle, and then people there for the fight. There were, you know, these Trump acolytes who were hawking all sorts of, you know, everything from T-shirts to Bibles. It just turns into this, just a carnival, and you know, it's hectic before, there's a mess afterwards. And I think someone in the chat just mentioned the Great American State Fair. That's just a continuation of it. That's something I could get into too. It's really just, it's fascinating because it's exactly who you expect to show up doing exactly what you think they would do.
So you also did duty at the Great American State Fair as well. From what we could see, it was not exactly well attended. Talk to us about, you know, there were like booths for PragerU and Hillsdale College and all sorts of interesting impersonators out there. Like, you know, I've covered political conventions, and it always brings out kind of the most outre group of people on both sides. It seemed like it was turbocharged for the Great American State Fair, though.
It was fascinating. And I will say that there, throughout the event, and it's still going on, by the way, it's going on till July 10th. There's still a Ferris wheel at the mall. There's still all the booths. And so there's a decent trickle of people coming in. It's Washington, D.C. People are here for all sorts of things. I would say the worst thing optics wise that it had going for it was that there was nothing to do outdoors and no shade. It's sunny, everything, the sun is beating down. There's exactly one ride, which is the Ferris wheel. There's no food booths outdoors, and these are all things that you see at state fairs. These are staples. There's rides, there's greasy food, there's deep fried everything, and there's just things to do everywhere. Whereas at this fair, it's, 6 blocks of small indoor enclosed booths, each representing every state and territory that's part of the United States. Really cool idea. But because there's nothing to do outside, everyone is frantically rushing to go from booth to booth to stay in the air conditioning. A lot of the booths are very poorly set up. I proudly am from Arizona, and I can say Arizona's actually looked really nice. Unfortunately, North Carolina, my birthplace, they had a Confederate flag, and so that there was a mess there. Other states, other states, they can,
like Hawaii didn't even send anyone.
Right. A lot of states, they didn't have anyone there. There were a couple things. Washington and Oregon combined their booth because, they weren't that into it, because it didn't feel very celebratory. A lot of the booths, because it was so hot, their electric grid on their section shut down, and so they had to close for a while. And so there were people, but they were all sequestered off in these individual booths, just sweating and just tired, trying to get from place to place. And then yeah, in the middles, there were these, I call them the grifter exhibitor booths, where it was, it was every absurd thing, PragerU, TPUSA, different Bibles. There was some MAGA artist who had gotten this entire section, and it was just about a dozen paintings of American flags in different settings, which was interesting in its own right, I guess. There was a display of not the Liberty Bell, but I think it's called the Freedom Bell. It's a bell that the U.S. gave to West Germany when the wall went up. It just really bizarre, non-patriotic displays of American exceptionalism, I guess. But then like ICE had a booth, DHS had a booth, all the different the Department of War had a booth. It was just really bizarre. It just kind of unfortunate, because you could see what it could have been if the congressional committee that Obama had set up had actually been allowed to do its job, and not just a slapdash opportunity to grift by the Trump administration.
Yeah. I spent the first part of my political career in Iowa, and the Iowa State Fair is it's such an iconic event. And if you're running for president, you're gonna go to the Iowa State Fair. You're gonna go to the Butter Cow. You're gonna eat a corn dog. This is just what you do. And so, like, there's a huge tradition out there that people are aware of, and how you run a fair right, even, if it becomes more of a political event. But this seems so typical for the Trump administration, where it's like the grift comes first, and the quality of experience is really far down the line of priorities.
Yeah, even little things, like for whatever reason, they insisted on having this high level security detail, meaning this, what is usually this open space, the National Mall, where you can come and go as you please, walk wherever you want, is confined into these high fences. There's, an entrance exit on one end, an entrance exit on the opposite end. And so you're funneled in, you feel like you're just in this heat bubble, and then there's nothing to do. It's just such a bummer. And what's interesting is, just a few blocks away, one of the Smithsonian's had an exhibit all about state fairs to commemorate and lead up. And they actually had the Iowa Butter Cow, and they had all these really cool things from all across the country, from state fairs, from all throughout American history. And I had gone to that before I went to the Great American State Fair. And just to see the comparison of just the detail, just the passion, just the, even things such as, all these different awards that people get at state fairs. It's really cool. And there are hundreds and thousands of people across the country who would love to have been a part of creating the Great American State Fair. And they were left out because because they just want to make a quick buck, I guess.
Yeah. Before we let you go, Cameron, the last time we had you here, we talked a lot about the excellent reporting that you've been doing on ICE detention centers in communities across the country. And since then, there have been some pretty significant victories, including one here in my home state of Michigan. There is a planned center in Romulus outside Detroit, right by the airport. Thanks to activists and our Democratic Attorney General, Dana Nessel, ICE gets to go home without their detention center. Can you catch us up on where these fights are across the country?
Yes. Yeah. And I will say the overarching conclusion to, or not conclusion because it's still going on, but the overarching situation right now is that DHS and ICE, as far as these, detention camps are concerned, has transitioned from a sole focus on cruelty and pain and is now focused on private profiteering and how they can funnel public money to private industries. So
Okay.
it's still just this disgusting form of corruption, but fewer people are going to die because of it and fewer families are going to be torn apart. So I think in that regard, it's a huge victory for activists and immigrants' rights groups and people who are opposed to American concentration camps. But so last time I came, we had been tracking 11 industrial warehouses that under Kristi Noem, DHS had purchased to turn these inhabitable warehouses into spaces to keep a mass amount of people that they have detained for an undetermined amount of time. Places that don't have bathrooms, don't have access to water or, utility infrastructure, places that don't have kitchens or food or showers. And they were just going to shove as many people as they could in there. People found out, we created this map so that people could find where they are and what they could do about them. And people responded. This map and others like it were used by millions to create protests on site, which made owners uncomfortable to sell. They pressured different municipalities into creating laws or city ordinances to prevent these facilities from being used as detention centers. I believe it was Kansas City. In Kansas City, for example, they passed a moratorium on detention centers in their area, making that site completely moot. In Arizona, they have reached a settlement agreement with ICE so that it, for the time being, cannot be used for detentions.
Okay.
And then there are 7 other locations that the new DHS Secretary, Markwayne McMullen, he has said that they are going to sell them. They're not going to use them for detention. They're not suitable for that. It was a mistake to purchase them. And now they're going to get rid of them entirely, which is good from a human rights standpoint. Now, what that means for taxpayers is that we've spent how many billions in buying these things, and now, from what I can tell, they're being sold for pennies on the dollar to either back to the person who bought them or to private contractors. And it's just a way to send money, our money, to these mostly Trump donors and Trump supporters, so that they can increase wealth.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're at the point where if we have to choose between evil, giving money to Trump affiliated, wealthy donors is better than facilities that house and kill people. But
Yes.
unfortunately, that is where we're at. I've been struck by the fact that there has been such a backlash in so many red communities to this. And certainly there's some NIMBYism, it's like, I might like the deportation policy, just not in my backyard. But, again, sometimes you have strange bedfellows, in fights like this. But I've seen a number of municipalities, big and small, that are passing moratoriums preemptively. And I have to think that has sent such a powerful message to the Trump administration about how unpopular this is in a lot of areas that they probably did not even expect.
Yeah. Well, I think you're exactly right. There's people. I think Social City, Georgia, is a perfect example. It's an incredibly Trump supportive region. in Georgia, overwhelmingly has always voted for him, never been a question. Entire town council is all in for Trump. They purchased a warehouse in Social Circle that was supposed to house 10,000 people. That's an absurd amount of people. Like there's no space that should hold 10,000 people as inmates. And they bought it in Social Circle, and the people there who support Trump's mass detention, they found out what that actually looks like. That would mean that there would need to be water going not to people who live there, but to this facility. They would need food and electricity, and that sort of impact on the electric grid would have raised the prices of their own electric bill. Yeah. And so I think it is a NIMBY thing, but it's also realizing at some level it hits those people that these are people. This water and this electricity and this food is used because there are people there. And when you're that close to it, it feels, one, inhumane, no matter how you look at it. Surprise, Arizona, where it's also a very conservative city, they didn't like it because of how close it was to the public schools. And, and that's a concern. In addition to the electric and everything else, it even to people who are on board with this horrible anti-immigration agenda, they see the impact and they don't like the government deciding unilaterally that this is what's going to happen. And I mean, it's interesting because I feel like it's a similar mentality with data centers, where there's this huge thing coming in that's going to be a massive suck on resources and on local economy. And it gets steamrolled, and people feel like they never had any input. They didn't have a say. And honestly, the two are very similar in a lot of people's minds, as far as just, you're going to do this to our community with no input from the community. How dare you? And people are finding that they can fight back and they can stop these things from happening. And honestly, it's unfortunate that it took this being pushed this far to this level of depravity for it to happen. But it is heartening to see that people are taking their power back, and they're using it effectively, and it's working.
And we've seen Alligator Alcatraz has been shut down. Obviously, that was also a boondoggle where quite a few people made money off of a very inhumane facility. But there are still facilities that are open, and a lot of eyes have been on Delaney in New Jersey, and some of the horrific conditions, especially as the heat wave has gone through the East Coast. But even before then, reports about conditions within the facility have just been horrific. Have you been doing any reporting out of what's been going on in that particular facility and the fight led by activists to try and improve conditions there?
Yeah, so I've been keeping tabs on the situation over there, and Courier wide, we've been covering it, letting people know what's going on there. And I think what's interesting about Delaney is that it is just the perfect microcosm of everything wrong with these facilities. It's seeped in layers of public-private bureaucracy. These facilities are managed by private companies and organizations, so the government can say, look, we wish we could offer you transparency, but this is a private group. You can't just be barging in and doing whatever you want there. It is cruel and inhumane to the people in there. There's people who are there for unknown amounts of time, people with illnesses, people who develop sicknesses while they're there, people who aren't being fed, people who aren't getting their hygiene necessities taken care of. And then just the not even disregard of activists, but outright spite towards them. The violence being conducted. It's pushing people beyond their limits. And I don't know how much longer it's going to keep at Delaney. It feels like it's a sticking point for the administration, where it's something they want to keep going, unlike Alligator Alcatraz, where people made their money, people got hurt, and they got out because it was starting to cost too much. I don't know when the cost will be too much at Delaney, but again, it's very encouraging that activists and just community members, not people who are used to going to protests or who have a history of it, just people who see it in their community, recognize inherently that it's wrong, and
Mhm.
are stepping up to stop it. I think as long as that continues, that they will be successful eventually.
Well, Cameron, I appreciate you spending so much time talking about the in-depth reporting that you've been doing both on immigration and the Tod Blanche hearings that we'll all be watching next week. Can you tell us the best way that people can find your work, both at Courier and online on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you again for having me and letting more people know about the reporting I've been doing. It's really important that people keep up to date on what's happening, not just in their backyard, but ways they can help nationally. So I report. I have a weekly column on Substack where people can get the emails and subscribe. It's called Below the Beltway, where I cover all of these issues. I'm also running, or part of a large investigation we've launched into the cover up of the Epstein files at Courier. We call it the cover up. People can also find, I do long form video explainers of my reporting on YouTube, on Courier's YouTube channel. And then on our Instagram and TikTok pages, I do shorter explainers if you don't have time to sit and watch a 15-minute video.
So in other words, you're really, really busy.
Yeah, sometimes more than I'd like to be, but there's nothing else I'd rather do.
Well, thank you so much, Cameron, and thank you to all of you for joining us as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great talking, and